Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be going over what can go wrong in a weight exercise and the proper cues to fix what can go wrong. Now, when I say what can go wrong, I mean in terms of technique. And the rule of thumb, or at least in my opinion, the rule of thumb when fixing what can go wrong is to always lower the weight and focus on your technique and just keep practicing at the technique so you get it a lot better. Problems with technique, a lot can arise from that in terms of pain and actual injuries when doing the lifts. And you won't gain strength from doing that at all, which is what we don't want. So the first exercise, I'm not going to go over technique so much as what I'm going to go over what can go wrong with technique, as I've gone over technique in a previous video. Obviously, because of COVID, don't have an actual gym, so I've got a mat right here for floor exercises, and this will simulate a bench for myself. So the first exercise we're going to do is the leg press. And so with the leg press, the leg press that I use at my gym is one of the ones where you sit on an incline and you push up from here. Now what I see is wrong that a lot of people do in their technique is on the down phase, when they're bringing the weight down to them, they have their knees way too close to their chest. I can't do it so much when I'm trying to do that, so you'll have it up to here. At that point, you're not really giving yourself any extra leverage with the weight, so you're gonna be using your back in that sense as you're bending with the hips a bit, and you're really just squishing yourself at that point, also putting a lot of strain on the ankle. And so it's best, the cue for that is just to keep your knees a bit in front of you. You don't have to go all the way down here. You're not lifting very much extra weight at that point, just having it in front of you and lift. You're still working the same muscles to the same extent. The next problem that we have is more at the top of the lift when you're about to bring it down. At this point, it might also be when you're setting the weight back down. If, like on my machine, you're setting it down at the top of the lift, people will lock their knees at this point. And so that can be a lot of weight that you're putting onto your knees. If you're locking them, it can seem like you're not holding up that much because your knees take over from your muscles. It's putting a lot of strain on the ligaments and really pushing the knee backwards from your joints. So the cue for that is always with lower body exercises like that, you gotta keep a slight bend in the knees. That's pretty much just a rule of thumb for just about any exercise. You're never gonna wanna lock the knees except for maybe in some stretches. The next exercise that we will focus on is the lunge. So some of these workouts, such as the lunge, they are not necessarily workouts that we have to do weights with to do them, but we're going to talk about them as if we're doing them with weights. So if you're using weights on a lunge, you're going to be using dumbbells, and that'll help with balance rather than doing it with something like a bar. So the first problem that people have with the lunge is at the knee. So you're always wanting to make sure that you're never letting your knee go in front of your toe, because that puts a lot of stress on the front ligaments on your knee, and there's not a lot of blood flow there, as I've explained before. So if you're injuring that, it's going to take a lot longer to heal. You always want to make sure your toe is at least your knee is at least behind the toe when doing something like a lunge, and that goes for every other workout, such as a squat. It's a cue that you can practice for pretty much any lower body workout. The next problem that you might have with doing this workout, especially if you're using weights in this workout, is with keeping your back straight. And another rule of thumb with these lower body workouts is keeping a straight back, keeping it in line, especially when you have weights that are on the upper body. And the dumbbells count because they're being held with your shoulders, and your arms. So in this sense, keeping your shoulders relaxed but back, so having the chest out. And at the end, a lot of people might tend to go forward with the dumbbells because they've got a lot of motion going forward here. That might be true if you're also wearing something like a weighted vest. And the problem with this, if you're doing it like this rather than like this, it can cause a lot of rounding at the shoulders and further back pain. So good rule of thumb with any exercise, even if it's upper body exercise, keeping your shoulders back, keeping a very straight back. A lot of workouts like that can result in rounded shoulders, which is a problem. So the next exercise we're going to talk about is the bench press. And there's a lot of wrong things that can happen with the bench press. So I'm going to talk about two common ones that I see. So with the bench, assuming that we're balanced and we have fairly good technique already, one problem that I see arise is at the wrist. And you don't pay too much attention to your wrists when you're working out as much as you do with your back or your knees or something like that. But what you'll find people start doing is they have the wrist, they turn the wrist back underneath the weight. It might go naturally for them if they've already got a bit of a bend at the wrist, but that puts pretty much all the weight of the bar onto your wrist joint. So the way to fix that, the key to fix that, is to always just keep your arm straight, as you would if you were holding a punch, keeping it straight like so. So having it sit on the flat of your wrist, wrapping your hand around it, keeping it straight, puts none of the weight onto the wrist, and you're good to go, so you don't damage that joint. The other problem I see with this workout is not so much a technique one as it is a practical one when people do this workout, and that is they tend to bounce the weight off the chest. So this is another problem that you might have when you are using a weight that's a bit too heavy for you. So like you'll see people do with the bench press, lower it down, it'll actually hit the chest most of the time, they'll bounce it off. And so they're using quite a bit of momentum at that point. And the problem with that is you're not actually building any strength when you do that. Instead, what you're doing is you're just using the momentum to bounce it off, try to make it that much easier for you. So what you're always wanting to do is instead do the 2-0-2 method. So 1, 2, down, 0, 1, 2, 1, 2, down, 0, 1, 2. That's not necessarily so much lifting technique as it's how you do the lift to maintain your strength, to get that progressive overload. And if you find you're using momentum, it is a sign that you have to lower the weight, and also maybe a sign you have to focus on technique. The next one that we're going to do is the overhead press. So one problem that people have with this one is arching too much at the back. So the reason when you're doing the overhead press, you're wanting to keep a straight back, right? And the reason that somebody might want to arch the back is because they might want to use the clavicle head of the pectoral muscle, the upper area of the pectoral muscle, to get that extra bit of push on the top. I know I've done this. And the problem with that, you're not isolating the shoulder. It's sometimes called the shoulder press. And you're trying to isolate the shoulder so you can work out just the muscles in the shoulder. On top of that, it's going to result in back pain, because when you're arching your back with an exercise like that and you're pushing it up like so, I can even feel it right now. You're going to get pain in the back and possible injury. So the cue to fix that is always just keeping as straight as you can. It's a vertical lift. There's no need to arch, and if you are, you've got too high of a weight, as I explained in the beginning. The next problem that you might have is lifting the weight a bit too much in front of you. So you've got it slightly in front of you, and this is just a common thing with the shoulder press, where people are trying to keep it somewhat away from their face. And the cue to fix this is just to focus on that vertical lift. It might sometimes be at the wrist that you're having this problem, just focusing it upwards there. And this can cause some pain to the shoulder blades and that sort of thing. So you're just wanting to keep it vertical the whole time. It's the same cue to fix both problems with your technique, just keeping it vertical. The next one that we are going to do is the hamstring curl. So again, this is an exercise where you're trying to isolate the muscle. So one problem that you might have with this one is that you will be lifting at the hips. It's hard to do this without, there's going to be some blocks that would stop me from doing that. But if you're lifting at the hips, you're lifting with both the hips and the hamstring. So in that sense, you're using your hips as well to try and pull that weight up. And so you're wanting to focus on keeping the hips relaxed and just focus on the hamstrings. The other problem you might have is flexing with the back as well. And if you're doing flexation like that, then you're using the back and the hamstring, so you're combining them. And that doesn't help for an exercise that's meant to be, that's essentially meant to be, it's meant to isolate in that sense. So you're gonna wanna keep yourself, the cue for that is just to keep yourself relaxed for the rest of your body, except for your hamstrings. Always focus on isolating the muscle there. The next one that we are going to do is back extensions. So with the back extension, one problem that people might have is they will hyperextend the back. So with doing that, this is an exercise for the spinal erectors. In doing that, it will feel like you're lifting. However, essentially what you're doing is you're causing back pain that may feel like you're lifting, but you're just causing a bit of pain to your back, and it's not helping you with your spinal erector muscles when you're just hyperextending the back. What you want to do is you want to focus on elongating them. And it is an isometric pose, but you want to make sure you're not hyperextending. Another problem, it's more in the stretch, but I see people do this as if it is an exercise, is using their arms to do that as well. And essentially what they're doing at that point is they are just hyperextending their spine with their arms. So the cue for that is just don't do that, essentially. And it goes the same for the other one, is always just focus on elongating the back rather than hyperextending it in order to work the spinal erectors. So the next one we're going to look at is another floor workout, the dead bug. So with this one problem that you can have, and you see it's arching the back, and this will, when you're going down like this, puts a lot more strain in the back as the hips aren't working so much to bring it down as the back is. So always focus, the cue for that, just relaxing the back when you bring the leg down. Another one will be, people will do some excessive hip extension, bringing it back like this. Bring your knee all the way back here. And that's not so much dangerous as it is just wasting your technique, where you're just, it's a lot more simple in that all you're wanting to do is just bring your knees to this area. There's no need to bring it any further back. That's just using the hip where it doesn't need to be used in that workout. So again, it's just focusing on the technique, keeping a straight, relaxed back. and you don't need to extend anything further than it has to be. So now the next one we're going to do is the lat pull. And a lot of the problem with the technique itself isn't too hard. It's just a lot of the problems usually come from a misunderstanding of the technique. So straight back, and it's easier to keep the straight back because the weight is pulling you upwards. One problem that people have is lifting it behind their head, and I've actually seen this as a common mistake, bringing it down behind your head. There's no natural movement where this is done. No, there's like if you're thinking of functional weight training, when are you ever going to bring something behind your head like that? It's just not a natural movement of the body, so it can result in shoulder pains and back pains in that sense. So the cue is to just do the exercise right, just bringing it down and up 90 degrees at the elbows. So the other problem that some people have as well, which I've also seen, is bringing it way further down than it has to. And this can go all the way from like under the neck to down to the hips. So the reason people might want to do that is because they want to bring it down because they think they're getting more exercise out of the lats. But you're not using your lats at that point, you're using more of your shoulders and even maybe your triceps at that point. But with this exercise, it's meant to isolate the latissimus dorsi. So just wanted to bring it just at about the nose line rather than any further down. So at that point, you're not even using the muscle that you're wanting to exercise. Those muscles can be exercised separately with much better technique. So the last one that we are going to do is a seated row. So the problem that you might have with this one is that when you're rowing, you might want to get that little more edge, and there is the technique, you do bring your back a little bit further back, but some people overextend this. So in that sense, they recruit their hips for an exercise that you're trying to do with the back. And so in that sense, you're not isolating the muscles that you want to isolate, and it does put a lot of pressure on the lumbar spine when you do something like that. So it's just a slight at the hips at the end, rather than bringing it all the way back. It does result in a lot of lumbar pain and further problems. So the cue for that, just think about an inch back rather than a whole foot or something of that sort. It can also cause the opposite effect, is if you're going a bit too forward with it, when you're going forward, when you're putting the weight down, a lot of people will have rounded shoulders, or they'll even have a rounded back under the pressure of the weight. It's the cue for this is to not think of the lift as over when you've hit the top, because it's very easy to lose technique after this. So what people are doing is they're extending their arms, and then they're just letting their back roll into it while they put the weight down. And they might do this more once they're completely done their set, but you can also see it when they're maybe even mid-set. So what they'll be doing is like that. But the problem is that's where you're lifting from as well, normally. So you're going to have a rounded back when you're bringing it back for the next lift. So essentially you're messing up your next lift by messing up putting it back down before. So the cue for that is, with any back workout, always keeping a straight back, no matter what, no matter whether you feel pressure from a push or pull movement, always keeping your back straight. So in terms of corrective cues, it almost goes without saying, the corrective cues are going to come with some practice, and you're going to, if you want to practice, you're not going to be focusing on lifting so much as you're going to be focusing on just allowing yourself to breathe for a bit and get more familiar with the technique. So in any sort of lift where you're having troubles with your technique, the rule of thumb is just bring the weight down and let yourself get used to it a bit, because you're not going to build any more strength from momentum. You're not going to build any more strength from wrong technique but high weights. Nobody's ever built strength from doing that. It just doesn't work, and it will cause you further back pain. But if you're able to alleviate that and have a perfect technique, you'll find yourself never having those problems.